threatening a hard-earned peace after a 12-year civil war. Burundi has seen days of protests against the president's decision to seek a third term in office. But is there an ethnic dimension to the political unrest? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Protests in Burundi are raising concerns that the impoverished African nation could be on the brink of further ethnic unrest. At least 6 people have been killed in days of demonstrations directed at President Pierre Nkurunziza. Opposition groups say his decision to run for a third term in office violates the constitution. Riot police are being accused of using live rounds to disperse demonstrators. Tensions have been rising since January, with more than 25,000 mainly minority Tutsis fleeing to neighbouring countries. It's reviving memories of Burundi's ethnically charged 12-year civil war, which exposed long-standing divisions between Tutsi and Hutu tribes. We'll go to our panel in a moment after we hear from Al Jazeera's Malcolm Webb in Burundi's capital, Bujumbura.
For months, activists here in Burundi have been saying if President Pierre Nkurunziza tried to run again for a third term in June's presidential election, that they would take to the streets. And on Saturday, his party, the ruling party, said that he would be its presidential candidate in the forthcoming election. So since Sunday, people have been protesting and clashing with police. Police have been firing tear gas. In some cases, some people have been shot, protesters responding with rocks, and they've steadily been moving closer towards the city centre. Meanwhile, supporters of the president say that his first term, starting in 2005, that followed a peace deal ending Burundi's civil war, they say that first term doesn't count because at that point he was elected by parliament because they couldn't hold a national election during that transitional period, and they say he didn't have full presidential powers. The constitution says the president can serve 2 elected terms, and Nkurunziza's supporters say his first term started after the presidential election in 2010, so he can run for 1 more. However, that 2005 peace deal says clearly that presidents can only serve 2 terms, and so all of the opposition, the activists, and several people in the international community, including the US, say it's clear it's only 2 terms and he's served those 2 terms, and so he should not run again. If the unrest continues and if the streets are like this come the end of June, it's going to be very difficult to hold an election. Also, some people are worried the situation will escalate if political militia or former rebel fighters from the countryside get involved. Again, that would make an election at the end of June unlikely. Even if the government does manage to take control of the streets, several prominent opposition presidential candidates have said they'll boycott the election, they won't run. They say that the constitution has been violated. They say that the Arusha Peace Accord, the 2005 peace deal, has been violated. So any election in which Pierre Nkurunziza runs, they say, would be meaningless.
I'm pleased to say we can start by talking to the Burundian president's spokesman, Gervais Abayeho. He joins me now on the line from just outside the capital, Bujumbura. Gervais Abayeho, some have described this as the greatest threat to peace in Burundi since the civil war ended in 2005. What's your take on what's happening on the streets right now?
There is no threat to peace and security in Burundi because the whole of Burundi, almost the whole of the countryside, is peaceful. People are going about their daily businesses, they are reporting to work, everything is normal in the countryside. It is only some few pockets in the capital, Bujumbura, that demonstrations are going on, demonstrations that we call insurrection because you know, these people are taking on the police, taking on the army, throwing stones at them, barricading roads, burning tires. And what I should emphasize is that even the capital, Bujumbura, we have 13 districts, 13 communes. Only 4 out of them are on the streets. So there is maybe a question there to be clarified.
For just a small bunch of troublemakers, as you say, in the capital, the government has taken rather a strong approach, haven't they? Using live ammunition and banning social media sites. Why?
It is not a matter to be taken lightly by the police. because organizers of this movement, of this insurrection, before it began, they had committed themselves to stage a peaceful demonstration. It is when they started taking on the police, throwing stones at them, burning tires. Some of them were even reported to be armed with a grenade, and some of them were reported to be armed with fire weapons. So when you engage the police like that, it means that the demonstration is no longer peaceful, and this is what brings the government to label it as an insurrection.
I'm interested to hear what you make of some of the radio broadcasts that have taken on an ethnic tone. Is there a risk of ethnic tensions exploding in Burundi right now?
Yeah, this is what I'm saying, my dear. Even those neighborhoods where these protests have started, these are Tutsi-dominated neighborhoods who maybe in the view of the government are trying to take back to those years in the 90s when there was a coup d'etat, when a democratically elected president was killed after only 100 days in office. And the government cannot tolerate such things. Now, these media you are talking about, these media are the ones who are ensuring, who are in fact broadcasting messages of hatred, calling on people to go to the streets, calling on this insurrection to happen. And they were coordinating this live from their studios. And these media, some people may not know, were using state infrastructures because they are using government pylons, they are using government signals to have their signals heard by whoever is listening to them. Now, the government cannot lend a hand to somebody who is insulting it and who is calling for people to go to the streets.
And when it comes to the elections, is it simply not the case that the president's bid for a third term is an unconstitutional power grab?
Now, what I can comment on this is that the president of the Republic of Burundi was for his first term in office elected by parliament. Somewhere in the constitution, they say that the president must be elected by the people once and then be elected by the people for one last term. This has not happened. Now, if there is confusion on whether he's serving a second term or a third term by standing again for his party's ticket, there are qualified organs who will explain this and tell the world that his application is valid or not valid. And this official organ, I have named the Constitutional Court, which was seized yesterday by Parliament to clarify this matter as soon as possible so that the world can know whether the president's application to stand again on his party's ticket can be approved or disapproved.
Gervais Abayeho, thank you very much for talking to us. Good to get your thoughts on Inside Story. Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Nairobi is Yolande Booker, conflict and risk analysis researcher at the Institute of Security Studies, and in Exeter, Andrew Wallace, Central and East Africa specialist. Welcome, the two of you. Thank you for joining us. Yolande, how big a threat to peace is what we are seeing on the streets of Burundi at the moment, or is it, as the presidential spokesman has just told us, isolated?
You know, it's a little bit disingenuous to say that it's isolated. You have a few neighborhoods in Burundi that have had some protests. There are also people from outside Bujumbura that are trying to get into the capital but have been prohibited because of roadblocks. So obviously there is a popular movement. To say that it's nationwide, I think, is not also accurate. But the movement is there. The movement is growing. It's gotten a little bit complicated for people to mobilize because of the shutting down of social media. However, people are still in the streets in different neighborhoods, and new neighborhoods actually have emerged in protests, and people outside Bujumbura also trying to get in.
Yes, who are these people outside who are trying to get in? Are they for or against him standing for a third term?
Actually, they are against, but they've been stopped there's been roadblocks. I think if you talk to people who are working around Bujumbura, they've had great difficulties getting in and out of the city. They're trying to prevent some of that movement to move inside the capital.
Andrew, how dangerous a situation is it right now? And is what we're seeing in the capital indicative of what we could be seeing in other parts of the country if this isn't stopped?
Well, I think it's dangerous on two fronts. Clearly, it's dangerous in Burundi itself. Internally, this is a country which went through a horrific civil war, costing around 300,000 lives, 12-year of conflict, and it has a history since independence of conflict, much of it on ethnic grounds. In 1972, indeed, Nkurunziza, the current president's own father, was killed at that time in 1993 and up to 2005. So there is a history of bloodletting, and clearly there is a good chance that unless a solution is found, a peaceful political solution is found, that some of those very open wounds will reignite. But clearly there's a problem also for the region itself. The DRC, one of its neighbours, the eastern region of the DRC, is very unstable. There's a huge problem with militia groups there as well that risk getting dragged into this and making it a problem for the whole East African community.
But we are hearing, on that note, that the president is bringing in fighters from the Congo, the FDLR. Why would he be doing that? Wouldn't that be creating greater problems?
Well, absolutely, and that really will ratchet up the problem, certainly in terms of his neighbour, Rwanda. Rwanda has been fighting for, well, as long as the FDLR has been around. The FDLR is a militia group made up of many ex-genocidaires who were involved in the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, who fled over the border, reformed, and have been fighting ever since then a pretty horrific war, terrorising the Kivus and trying to come back and carry out that terror in Rwanda. They have now got satellite groups involved inside Burundi, and accounts say that some of the government youth militia, the Imbonerakure, have also got FDLR fighters involved with them. Now, obviously, the problem is if there's a breakdown, further instability in Burundi, FDLR may well try to take advantage of that. And the question is whether Rwanda would stand by and allow that to happen.
You land with the scars still so deep from the civil war and knowing the sort of impact it'll have on the region. The radio stations, those that are still allowed to broadcast, why are they putting out material that is increasingly ethnic in tone?
Look, I also want to, let's mitigate the context of ethnic violence. A lot of talk has been done about the legacy of ethnic violence in Burundi. I also want to emphasize that what we see at the moment is a political struggle between the ruling party and the opposition, between the ruling party and, unfortunately, the civil society also is in a position where they're calling for change. And if we want to remember that in 2010 to 2012, most of the violence that took place after the election was not between Hutu and Tutsi, but was between the CNDD-FDD, which is predominantly Hutu, and the FNL, which is another Hutu group. So let's, try to, I don't want to be alarmist about the ethnic realities on the ground. I don't want to discount them either. When we talk about the FDLR from the Congo, we're also talking about a militia who's composed of a few elements of the ancient FDLR of 20 years ago. But what you have is new fighters who, until recently, were relatively dormant in Eastern Congo. So the dynamics are a bit I think we have to mitigate what we're talking about here. And if the FDLR is indeed in Burundi, then it would definitely complicate the situation. But I want to emphasize the political nature of the struggle, and that we still have the FNL that is standing by. And until that group actually acts, we don't really know what the conflict is going to look like.
And the FNL belonging to the opposition, right? Let's just say there was some concern or some cause for optimism when Burundi held its first democratic elections in 1993. But the first elected Hutu head of state was assassinated months later, setting off Burundi's civil war. Widespread fighting pitched the minority Tutsi-dominated army against mainly Hutu rebel groups. Some 300,000 people were killed. An internationally brokered power-sharing deal paved the way for peace and a new Hutu majority government in 2005. That's when Pierre Nkurunziza came to power. He was re-elected in 2010, but the polls were disputed by the opposition, casting a shadow over the reconciliation process. Andrew, are we going to see elections go ahead?
I'm pretty sure they will go ahead under circumstances which are clearly far from ideal and which would be disputed as democratic probably in most places. I think there's a big function here for the EAC, the East African Community, and really, you know, the lessons of 21 years ago in Rwanda. The international community and the African Union as well tended to sit on its hands a bit and pass around what was happening, whether it was a genocide or not. And really, you know, the EAC has to get real here and has to start putting pressure on to say, look, you cannot just shut down the opposition and the media and civil society while you have your election and get re-elected. That is not
And how should they back that up? I mean, should we be seeing some sort of regional force now moving into Burundi? Is that a solution?
Very much the mantra has been African. Yeah, the mantra has been African solutions for African problems. Well, African solutions need to start happening here. It is an unstable region. There are big problems. Burundi, while Nkurunziza has done well, I think, since 2005 in some way to bring the ethnic group together. And I agree, this really is a political, it's not an ethnic problem, but it could well erupt into that if a smaller group gets scapegoated, as happened in Rwanda. But Nkurunziza at the minute is weak, really. Both inside his own party, there are elements which don't support him inside the army, there are elements who don't support him, and the fact he's now relying on sort of intimidatory tactics is never a good sign. And we have still 2 months to go before the election, so in some ways things can only get worse. Refugees are pouring out of the country. Today we heard the National University has been shut down suddenly as well.
All right, okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Burundi's president. Excuse me jumping in there, Andrew. Pierre Nkurunziza promotes himself as a man of the people and says one of his main priorities is to pull the country out of poverty. The 51-year-old former soldier and Hutu rebel group leader was born to a Tutsi mother and a Hutu father. He was sentenced to death in his absence in 1998 for laying landmines, but given an amnesty under a peace accord. Opponents accuse his administration of taking a hard line against political opponents. He's a self-described born-again Christian and runs and plays in his own football team called Hallelujah FC. But in March last year, he banned jogging, fearing it was being used as a cover for subversion, with sentences ranging from 5 years in prison to life. Yolanda, I mean, obviously an interesting character. And it seems that the developments on the streets have been bubbling for some time. What has he brought, from a positive point of view, to the country so far?
And a lot of what he's brought comes hand in hand with the Arusha Accord. With the Arusha Accord, you had a power-sharing agreement in the political sphere and also in the security sphere. And that has enabled the country to move forward in relative security for the past 10 years. And I think this is that element that we're missing in this discussion is the security has been guaranteed, most importantly, by the power-sharing agreement that allows the military to be fully integrated, to be a Republican army, an army that has been trained extensively by foreign actors and has participated in UN missions around the world. And that army so far has been able to remain neutral in this highly politicized environment. But if that changes, if it breaks off between UPRONA and CNDD, FDD supporters within the military, that's when we could see things shifting a little bit. And in my opinion, Nkurunziza is doing a lot of damage by last year trying to change the constitution and changing this balance of power. In the past few years, I would say he's done a lot of things in Burundi that can destabilize and make some groups feel insecure. Economically, Burundi is not doing particularly well for the region. It's considered to be highly corrupt. It's trying to make headway, but it's very far from its neighbor to the north, Rwanda, which is a part of the East African community. But when we talked about calling in the East African community to intervene in Burundi about this constitutional issue, about suppressing the press, suppressing political opposition, we also have to look at the neighbors of Burundi. They are not hallmark of democratic process or free press or opposition. There are countries who also keep a tight lid on those voices of dissent in their own countries.
Andrew, if he does what people don't expect him to do, which is step down, obviously it could have quite dramatic continental impact, wouldn't it? The fact that popular protests force a president to step down like we saw in Burkina Faso. But if he doesn't, how much time do you think Burundi has at the moment?
Well, I think it's worsening by the day. Some would say by the hour at the minute. I mean, we're having now thousands of refugees are pouring into the neighbouring countries, Rwanda and the DRC. Rwanda, I'm told, is catering for 50,000. But I think that's a pretty low estimate. And, you know, it's 7 weeks now to the elections. That could come to be really a large stream of refugees pouring into the two neighbouring countries, destabilising them as well.
Yolanda, I know we were talking earlier about, you know, African solutions for African problems. We know that the US is a representative in Burundi at the moment. What sort of role should the international community play, knowing in particular what happened to its neighbor in the past?
I think the role of the international community is mitigated by its decreasing leverage towards Burundi. The international community, countries like the United States, the UK, the European Union and Belgium and so forth, do contribute greatly to the budget of Burundi. I'm told about 50% of its budget comes from the outside. At the same time, Burundi has a very large contingent of troops serving in Somalia and different countries in sub-Saharan Africa, contributing a large number of officers to counterterrorism efforts in Somalia, for instance. Therefore, it kind of tips the balance of power a little bit and puts Burundi at a position of strength. What they can do is what they've been doing for quite some time, actually. Since last year, you've had the European Union, the United States, and other countries calling on caution to the ruling party to abide by the Arusha Agreement, to abide by the spirit of the Constitution and so forth, and to open the political space. They had a roadmap with the United Nations when the full mission was still in Burundi that detailed the different steps that needed to be taken to get to a free and fair election, which in fact starts in May. There's multiple rounds of elections going on in Burundi, and in about 4 weeks, the first round should start, and I think it's a legislative elections that start. So we have actually less time than 7 weeks to make this happen. And the international community has been involved in that. However, at this point, what we would like to see, I think researchers and people who follow the situation, is a voice from the African community. Yesterday, the African Union Peace and Security Council met, and they are very concerned about the violence. They've called on all parties to refrain from engaging in violence. They've also called on the government to open the political space, but they've also called on all Burundians to defer to the ruling of the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court has been called upon by the Senate, a few senators, to rule on whether President Nkurunziza is indeed eligible to run for president. Some people are concerned that the Constitutional Court may be biased to the president, but we will see where it goes. But at the end of the day, we really want to see a regional voice. The international community from the West is very good at calling on people to do what they should be doing, but I think what we're waiting for is the African voice of the leaders here.
And thank you very much for talking to us, Yolande Booker, on a situation that seems to be getting worse daily, according to Andrew Wallace. Thank you too, as well as to Gervais Abayeho, the Burundian president's spokesman, who joined us a little earlier on. And of course, thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can get in touch with us on our program page at aljazeera.com. Post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us. Go to @AJ Inside Story or @Jane Dutton. For me and the rest of the team, bye.